another episode of Lior, Lucci, Ben, and Eddie talking about anti-patterns in Agile. And one thing that we talk a lot about is this idea that we need to be Agile because it means less documentation, or that Agile means that we don't document anything at all. Let's talk about that. I'm curious what everyone's experience is coming from a documentation standpoint. Do we document in Agile? I'm not even sure anymore.
I mean, it's funny you should say that. I just interviewed a coach, and one of the first things I ask any person I interview is, why do you think Agile works? Or why, what interests you about Agile? And he said, Agile's great because you don't have to document very much, which I didn't ask him to elaborate on. The minute I hear something like that, I'm like, okay, well, this person's not quite sure what Agile is or isn't.
So where do you think, any ideas about where this misnomer comes from?
If I had a guess, it's probably misunderstanding the 4 principles, right? Working software over comprehensive documentation. People don't seem to get that while there's value on the things to the left, we still require the things to the right. I just think they get confused.
Yeah, it's about knowing the history as well, right? So if you realize that Agile was a response to something, and it was calling out something, and it was saying more than that thing, then of course it makes a lot more sense, right? Because we're not saying documentation is useless. We're saying, hey, we need to put a bit more value on this instead of on documentation, compared to this system that relies fundamentally on documentation. So seeing, like, I mean, if you take any philosophy, right, and take it out of context, you can misinterpret it to mean whatever you want. And I think people like the flashy idea of, maybe it's the name that's misleading, right? Where it's Agile, which means everything's crazy and we run around all the time and everything's changing. But like, it's just more like a little bit faster than waterfall, please, right? I mean, for me, I don't think anyone who I've worked with would believe that, because I think every single ticket I've seen go through development has had a update wiki documentation subtask. Every single meeting, when someone has a question, go to our wiki documentation gets said. So I can't comprehend it.
I don't think it's different here. I've definitely been in places where it's been, everything is documented, every process is documented somewhere. And then there is the other end of the spectrum where I've had a team who they called themselves cowboy coders, and they didn't document anything, they just coded, and then they didn't know what was in the system later. So I always wonder, well, what is the right level, right? I mean, you've got these extremes out there in the world. You've got those startup companies that might not have any documentation at all, to the bigger companies that are all about the bureaucracy of what Eddie's talking about. So what's the right amount? What should people be thinking about then when it comes to documentation?
I don't think that Agile will ever prescribe a right amount, I would say, and I'd like to hear Lior and Ben's thoughts on this as well. I think it's always kind of more of a this much. It's not a this much documentation is correct. It's more of a say why to documentation. Constantly asking, why do we have this documentation? What's the purpose of this? Right? It's a little bit more towards like being lean, right? In that sense, in terms of what is necessary, and constantly asking what's necessary.
I'll put it to you like this. When you're cooking, do you stop at times to taste the food? Right? If you just follow a recipe and you never taste the food, it's probably not going to turn out that great. So whether we're talking about documentation or anything else, Agile has this concept of just-in-time planning. Whether you're planning for what's coming next or you're writing up a documentation of anything, the later in the process that you actually make a decision and document something, the more knowledge you have, and therefore that document becomes, everything in Agile should be a living repository of information that benefits from lessons learned.
I think how much is needed. I think there's also this idea that more than one source of the truth can be harmful as well. So I think a lot of people subscribe to the idea that the truth is in the code. That the only thing that matters is how the software behaves, not the documentation which says how the software should behave, because that's not how the software behaves. So the truth is in the code, the truth is in the way the system operates. we can look at the state of the software and say, this software does this definitively because we just look at the software. I think that's why a lot of people will say, well, we don't need documents about what the software does because we've got the software and it does it. I think what isn't captured by a very kind of that extreme view is the why of a lot of our choices that we've made. It just shows the current state and it doesn't show any choices we made along the way. So if there's anything that we might want to capture, it might be why we chose to do things, how we chose to do them.
And I have a question. Is it something about the team that the whole team decides, okay, let's not document, for instance, or is it very important the role of either the Scrum Master or I don't know, the product owner? Who is it that then drives that discipline to document, and in what level, as Alana was saying, like let's document everything, or in I don't know, sensing what is best for the overall project? What is your experience about that?
That's a great question, and it's very role based. So one of the things I always tell folks when I'm teaching them Agile is you're not doing anything different when you're doing Agile from when you were doing Waterfall. Agile just says, let's limit activities that don't directly deliver value. So if you're an architect, then you need to document the architecture, right? If you don't have documented architecture and you try to extend the architecture, it's going to fail. So you need documented architecture. If you're a product owner, then you need to document, the impact of what you're trying to deliver to the customer. If you're an engineer and you've completed work, then you need to document what you've completed. And everything becomes documentation, rather than being this big upfront thing, becomes an ongoing, I've finished a user story, this gets added to the repository, and whatever documentation is necessary in order to maintain an evolving view of what we're up to and where we're going next becomes a part of some kind of, whether it's on Confluence or another tool, some kind of a living documentation repository, so that as folks, maybe other folks extend the code or new team members join, they have something to refer to.
I think I'll extend that as well, actually. I think documentation isn't documentation for documentation's sake. It's there to serve a purpose. And quite often that is to onboard people more quickly, to be able to support the software more effectively. It's got a return on investment, and anything that has a return on investment suggests that we have to invest in it for a future benefit. And the person who makes those choices is the product owner. So if you have a good product owner who's engaged and willing to listen and have these kind of conversations, you can say, I need to spend a little bit longer on every user story that I do because I need to do a certain amount of documentation, so that the cost to support your system in 12 months, in 24 months is cheaper. So you're going to pay a little extra now, but it's going to compound and you're going to save much more in the future. And most good product owners will appreciate that. And they will appreciate the framing the choice in a way that they can engage with it.
I really love this conversation because I think it comes down to asking ourselves, if you're on a team, wherever you are, ask, what do you do every day? What processes do you do and why? And if you don't know why, maybe you don't need it anymore, and just understanding the intention behind all that we do. So yeah, I'm curious about other people's thoughts out there. What do you document that you think is really silly? What are things that you document that you think are really important? I don't know, maybe you just document every moment of your day, or maybe you never documented anything before. I'm curious to hear what you all think. Thank you so much, Lior, Lucci, Ben, Eddie. We'll see you soon.